Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa, 28 years old, born and raised in upstate New York, and now living in a luxury penthouse I bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears in Manhattan. My family? Let's just say, they never really believed in me, especially not my mother. But what happened at my younger sister's wedding flipped my world upside down. My parents demanded I hand over the penthouse as a wedding gift. When I refused, my mother slapped me. Right there, in front of 100 guests. That was the moment I decided. They had no idea who they'd just crossed. Have you experienced betrayal like this? Leave it in the comments. And if you like stories of revenge served cold, hit like and subscribe. Growing up in the Carson household in upstate New York was an experience. We were, by all outward appearances, the picture of upper middle class American success. A beautiful house with a manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, annual family vacations. But beneath that veneer, there was always a clear distinction, a palpable difference in how my sister Emily and I were treated. Emily was the sun around which my parents' world revolved. From the moment she was born, she was adored, cherished, and celebrated. She was the quintessential golden child, beautiful, sweet, always compliant. Every talent show, every school play, every ballet recital, she excelled, and my parents were right there, front and center, beaming with pride. She was a natural at everything she touched, or so it seemed. The beauty pageants started when she was just a little girl, and she usually brought home a ribbon, a sash, a small crown. My mother, Diane, would preen, living vicariously through Emily's achievements. Emily was the perfect daughter, the one who fulfilled every expectation. Then there was me, Vanessa, the older sister by 3 years, but often feeling like I belonged to a different species entirely. I was, in their eyes, the black sheep, not because I was inherently bad or caused trouble, but because I simply didn't fit their mold. Where Emily was graceful, I was practical. Where she loved performing, I preferred creating. While she dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, I dreamt of building something tangible, something significant. The real rift, the one that truly sealed my fate as the family outcast, came when I made the decision to not follow the path they had meticulously laid out for me. My parents, particularly my mother, had always envisioned me going to an Ivy League law school. The prestige, the connections, the respectable career, that was their definition of success for me. I even got into a good university, and for a while, I pretended to be on board. But deep down, I knew it wasn't right. My mind was buzzing with ideas, with algorithms, with the boundless potential of technology. So I did what any rebellious, determined 20-year-old would do. I ditched law school. To them, it was an act of personal betrayal, a slap in the face to all their sacrifices. Key arguments were endless, fueled by disappointment and anger. My mother's biting remarks became sharper, my father's passive disapproval heavier. They simply couldn't comprehend why I would walk away from such a stable, respectable future for some risky computer nonsense. But I wasn't just walking away. I was walking towards something. I poured every ounce of my energy, every flicker of my passion, into building my tech startup from the ground up. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of intense doubt, and the constant, nagging feeling of their disapproval looming over me. Friends and extended family would ask, "How's law school?" And I'd have to explain, again to their polite confusion, that I was working on something else. My parents rarely mentioned it, and when they did, it was usually with a sigh or a veiled comment about how Emily was so much more sensible. Against all odds, against their skepticism, against the financial struggles of a fledgling business, I made it work. My risky computer nonsense wasn't nonsense at all. It blossomed, it thrived, it evolved into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And with the success, I bought it my stunning penthouse in Manhattan. Not just an apartment, but a symbol. A symbol of my independence, my defiance, my self-made success. It was proof that I didn't need their approval or their prescribed path to achieve something significant. Yet, even with all of that, even with the demonstrable success, the growing company, the luxury apartment overlooking the city, it was never enough for them. I could build an empire, but in their eyes, I would always be less than Emily. Less graceful, less poised, less golden. My achievements were seen as flukes or simply ignored, while Emily's smallest accomplishments were magnified and celebrated. I was the one who went off script, the one who colored outside the lines, and they never truly forgave me for it. They certainly never acknowledged that my unconventional path had led to a level of success far beyond what they could have imagined for me in their traditional framework. And sometimes, deeply, I yearned for that acknowledgement, that simple recognition from the people who were supposed to be my biggest cheerleaders. But it never came. Instead, the stage was always set for Emily. Emily's wedding was supposed to be the pinnacle of their perfect life. A high society affair, held at a prestigious venue in the Catskills, a place brimming with old money and even older expectations. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the imported flowers to the custom-made designer gown. It was extravagant, bordering on opulent, and frankly, suspiciously expensive for a family whose patriarch had supposedly retired early. I arrived a few days before the main event, ostensibly to help with the final preparations, but mostly because my mother had insisted. I still held a flicker of hope that perhaps, at such a significant family event, some lance of warmth or genuine connection might emerge. Spoiler, it didn't. 2 days before the wedding, I was in my childhood bedroom trying to find something suitable to wear for the rehearsal dinner, when my parents called me down to the living room. The setting felt strangely formal, almost like an interrogation. My mother, Diane, sat on the edge of the sofa, perfectly poised, while my father, Robert, perched in his armchair, a nervous energy about him. I instantly felt a prickle of unease. "Vanessa, dear," my mother began, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that always put me on edge. "We need to discuss something very important regarding Emily's future." My father cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Yes, it's about a wedding gift." "A wedding gift?" I thought. Emily was getting plenty of gifts. My unease deepened. Then my mother dropped the bomb. "We were thinking, darling, that as a truly meaningful gesture, you could gift Emily and Jacob your penthouse apartment in Manhattan." I must have blinked. And then blinked again. I actually thought I had misheard her. My penthouse? The one I had painstakingly earned, that represented years of relentless work and sacrifice? The one place that was truly mine? My penthouse? I repeated, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. "As a wedding gift?" My mother nodded, as if this was the most logical, generous, and utterly obvious suggestion in the world. "Yes. It's perfect. You're so successful, Vanessa. You can always buy another one." But for Emily, it would be a fairy tale beginning. A wonderful first home for them in the city. My father chimed in, "Think of it, Vanessa, a family legacy." It would solidify Emily and Jacob's position, give them a real start. I stared at them, trying to process the sheer audacity. They were asking me to hand over a multi-million-dollar asset as casually as if it were a pair of earrings or a toaster. There was no discussion, no consultation, just a clear expectation that I would comply with their absurd demand. The entitlement was breathtaking. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Absolutely not." My mother's face, which had been set in a mask of pleasant expectation, turned to stone. The sweetness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare I knew all too well. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "I mean, it's not happening," I clarified. "That penthouse is my home. It's my investment. It's not something I'm giving away as a wedding present, especially not under these circumstances." The air in the room grew thick with unspoken accusation. My mother's lips thinned into a severe line. My father shifted uncomfortably, clearly hoping the ground would swallow him whole. The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered, a palpable weight pressing down on everything. I knew then that my refusal wouldn't be easily forgotten or forgiven. The wedding day dawned with a deceptive charm. The Catskills air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue. Emily looked stunning in her gown, radiating an almost ethereal glow, completely oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her. Guests arrived in their finest attire, the chatter and champagne flowing freely. Everything seemed picture perfect until it wasn't. The ceremony itself was lovely, full of the usual vows and sentiments. It was during the reception, a sprawling affair under a grand tent, that the true drama unfolded. I had been making polite small talk, trying to keep a low profile, when my mother approached me. She was still in her elegant mother of the bride gown, looking every inch the sophisticated socialite. Her smile, however, was tightly stretched, and her eyes held a chilling intensity. "Vanessa," she cooed, low enough so only I could hear. "Have you reconsidered our lovely idea for Emily's gift?" I knew what she was referring to. Despite my firm refusal, she clearly hadn't given up. "Mother, we discussed this." My answer is still no. It's not happening. Her jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment, I saw true fury flash in her eyes. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut. "After all we've done for you, you disrespect your family like this. You spoil everything." My patience, already thin after a lifetime of their subtle and not so subtle criticisms, finally snapped. "Spoil everything? Mother, you're asking me to give away my home. That's not a reasonable request, and my refusing it isn't spoiling anything. It's basic self-preservation." The next few seconds stretched into an eternity. Without a word, without a moment's hesitation, her hand flew up. And then there was a sharp, stinging pain on my cheek. The sound, a crisp, sickening smack, cut through the ambient hum of the reception. It was loud enough that conversations around us died down. Heads turned. 100 pairs of eyes fixated on us, on me, holding my throbbing, red cheek. My mother, her face contorted in a mask of rage and entitlement, stood frozen, her hand still slightly raised. Emily, who had been laughing with Jacob nearby, turned, her smile faltering, her eyes wide with shock. My father looked as though he might crumble to dust. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the rapid beating of my own heart. The shock quickly gave way to a cold, burning anger. A slap. In her gown. In front of everyone. It was beyond humiliating. It was a profound, public declaration of their contempt for me, their belief that they had the right to control my life, my assets, my very existence. In that moment, standing there, cheek throbbing, surrounded by the sudden, stunned silence of 100 witnesses, something shifted irrevocably inside me. The years of feeling, then, the dismissal of my achievements, the constant comparison to Emily, it all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Pain on my cheek was nothing compared to the deep, aching wound of betrayal. But amidst that pain, a new feeling bloomed, cold and resolute. That was the precise moment I knew. I needed revenge. Not petty, emotional revenge, the kind that might satisfy for a moment and then fade. No, I needed calculated, irreversible revenge. The kind that would dismantle their carefully constructed world piece by piece, just as they had tried to dismantle mine. They had no idea who they had just slapped. The sting of my mother's hand was long gone, but the shock of it, the absolute audacity of that public slap, lingered. It pulsed beneath my skin, a constant reminder of their blatant disrespect and entitlement. As I sat alone in my Manhattan penthouse the day after the wedding, the question gnawed at me. Why did they need my apartment so desperately? The wedding itself, as I mentioned, was absurdly extravagant, $200,000, easily. More, perhaps my father, Robert, had supposedly retired early, a few years ago. Early retirement for a man in his late 50s. Generally, doesn't involve financing a lavish $200,000 wedding for his daughter. Especially not when that daughter, Emily, had never really held a consistent, high-paying job. She dabbled in this, and that, mostly living off my parents' perceived wealth. It just didn't add up. My parents always maintained an image of comfortable, upper-middle-class living. They were careful with appearances, but beneath the surface, inconsistencies had always flickered now. After the penthouse demand and the public humiliation, those flickers ignited a cold, hard suspicion. How were they really supporting this lifestyle? How could they afford to casually ask for my prized possession? My initial instinct was anger, a blinding rage that made me want to scream, but I quickly suppressed it. Anger, unchecked, leads to impulsive, self-defeating actions. I needed clarity, I needed information, and for that, I knew exactly who to call. Maya Lin. She was a private investigator I'd met years ago through a convoluted business deal. A potential partnership that hadn't panned out but had forged an unlikely and useful alliance. Maya was sharp, resourceful, and had a reputation for digging up information others couldn't even dream of. She operated in the shadows. A master of discreet inquiries, she owed me a favor or two. And I knew she was the best person for this kind of delicate, deeply personal investigation. I called her the very next day. I laid out the bare bones of the situation, omitting the emotional trauma of the slap at first, focusing on the financial discrepancies, the opulent wedding, my father's early retirement, Emily's lack of substantial income, and then the audacious demand for my penthouse. I told her I suspected there was more going on than met the eye, a financial instability they were desperate to conceal. I listened patiently, her voice calm and analytical on the phone. Understood. Vanessa. A sudden, exorbitant request like that usually points to underlying pressure. What do you want me to look into? Everything, I said, my voice low and firm. Their financial records, their property, any hidden assets, any debts. I want to know how that wedding was financed and why my apartment suddenly became their plan A. Maya started her work immediately. She was a ghost, leaving no trace, just gathering facts. Weeks passed. The wedding photos, carefully curated for social media, flooded my feeds, showcasing the perfect day. Emily and Jacob were on their honeymoon, presumably in paradise. My parents were back at their upstate home, maintaining their facade. And I was in my penthouse, waiting. Then the reports started coming in from Maya. Each one hit like a cold, wet towel slapped across my face, chilling me to the bone. The first revelation: my parents had remortgaged their home. Not just once, but twice, taking out substantial loans against its equity. This explained the sudden influx of cash that funded the wedding. They were essentially sacrificing their future for present appearances. It was reckless, financially irresponsible, and utterly characteristic of their obsession with maintaining a certain image. But that was just the beginning. The next discovery made my blood run cold, a true sense of betrayal curdling in my stomach. Maya had uncovered evidence of a hidden trust, a substantial family inheritance that had been set aside by my maternal grandmother years ago. This inheritance, by the terms of the will, was to be split equally between Emily and me upon our 25th birthdays. Emily had already received her share, which had conveniently vanished into her lifestyle. My 25th birthday had passed 3 years ago, but I had never seen a cent of my half. Instead, Maya found irrefutable proof that my parents had been secretly draining my share of the inheritance for years. Not just spending it, but actively concealing its existence from me, moving funds through various accounts to make it untraceable. They had simply taken what was legally mine and used it to prop up their unsustainable lifestyle and likely fund Emily's extravagant tastes. The retired early narrative solidified into a stark, uncomfortable truth. They had retired on my dime. The anger that had simmered before now boiled over. This wasn't just about a slap or an absurd request. This was outright theft, a calculated deception that had been going on for years. They hadn't just forgotten me as the black sheep. They had actively exploited me. And then Maya delivered the final, most devastating blow. The reason for their desperate need for my penthouse. It wasn't just a casual request or an entitled wish. It was a last-ditch, desperate act. My parents, specifically my father under the influence of my mother, had used my name, my clean financial history, and forged my signature to secure a fraudulent loan. A massive one. The kind that could land someone in serious legal trouble. They had used my identity to access funds they couldn't get themselves, very likely to cover mounting debts or to pay off something related to the wedding's extravagant costs. That penthouse demand? It wasn't a request. It was a last-ditch cover-up. They needed to sell my property, which they somehow mistakenly believed they could legally claim through some convoluted parent-child entitlement logic, to pay off this fraudulent loan before it was discovered. The slap wasn't just about my defiance. It was about their panic. They were cornered. And they had been willing to sacrifice my financial future, even my freedom, to save their own crumbling facade. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity. The years of neglect, the constant comparison, the coldness, the financial recklessness, it all made a terrible kind of sense. My parents weren't just disappointed in me for choosing my own path. They were resentful. Resentful of my independence, my success, and the fact that I was an asset they couldn't control. And when their own financial house of cards began to collapse, they saw me, the self-made millionaire daughter with a luxury property, as their personal bailout fund. The slap at the wedding wasn't just an act of anger. It was an act of desperation. And the demand for my penthouse? It wasn't an entitled suggestion. It was a desperate attempt to cover up a colossal, criminal financial lie. My blood ran cold, not just from anger, but from a profound sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical blow. They weren't just my parents. They were criminals who had exploited their own daughter. And now I knew. Now I had the evidence. The anger solidified into something far more dangerous. A cold, calculated resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about ensuring they faced the full consequences of their actions, teacher rage, sharp and cold, that had settled in my stomach after Maya's revelations quickly transformed into a singular, unwavering focus. This wasn't just about proving a point or getting even. It was about justice. It was about taking back everything they had stolen from me, financially and emotionally, and ensuring they faced the full, unvarnished consequences of their deceit. My revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic, at least not initially. It would be methodical, precise, and utterly devastating. They had no idea the kind of opponent they had created. My first priority was to secure the inheritance that was rightfully mine. The idea that they had been secretly siphoning off funds from my grandmother's trust, a trust legally designated for me, was infuriating. With the evidence Maya provided, bank statements, trust documents, and their suspicious withdrawal patterns, I engaged a top-tier legal team specializing in fiduciary fraud and estate law. I gave them a singular directive: freeze that account immediately and reclaim every cent that was due to me, plus NEI, interest, or damages. This was done through proper legal channels, quietly, without fanfare. They wouldn't know what hit them until the lawyers' letters arrived. Next, and far more complex, was the fraudulent loan they had taken out in my name. This was the most egregious betrayal. Not only had they stolen my identity, but they had exposed me to immense financial and potentially legal risk. Maya had diligently collected every shred of evidence. The forged loan documents, suspicious email correspondences, and even subtle shifts in the flow of their finances that correlated with the loan's disbursement. It was a meticulous paper trail, laid out with such clarity that it left no room for doubt. This was where my strategic approach came into play. I wouldn't confront them. There would be no emotional pleas, no angry accusations. That was their game, and I refused to play it. Instead, I carefully compiled a comprehensive dossier. Every receipt, every bank statement, every email, every forged document, it was all there, damning and undeniable. I cross-referenced dates, highlighted anomalies, and presented it all in an incontrovertible package. My years in the tech world had taught me the power of data, of irrefutable facts. I applied that same rigorous, logical approach to dismantling their lies. I then engaged another set of lawyers, one specializing in financial fraud and identity theft. I explained the situation, emphasizing the cold, hard facts. Their initial reaction was one of shock, followed by a steely determination. This wasn't merely a family dispute. It was a serious criminal offense. My instruction was clear: proceed with legal action, expose the fraud, and protect me from any liabilities incurred by their illicit actions. But do it quietly at first. No public spectacle until absolutely necessary. I wanted the full weight of the legal system to descend upon them, unexpected and overwhelming. While the legal machinery began its slow, grinding work, I continued to gather intelligence. Maya was still on retainer, diligently monitoring their activities. I wanted to understand the full scope of their reckless behavior, every secret they harbored. This period of quiet preparation, of gathering my forces and planning my moves, was essential. It allowed me to transform my raw anger into a precise, surgical instrument. I was no longer reacting. I was orchestrating. The beauty of this strategy was its stealth. My parents, caught up in the glow of the wedding and the perceived triumph of having gotten rid of me, had no idea the storm brewing on their horizon. They were probably still celebrating their perceived victory, confident that I, the black sheep, would simply sulk away. They wouldn't have imagined that their discarded daughter was now meticulously constructing their downfall, brick by damning brick. When the legal notices finally started landing on their doorstep, I can only imagine their confusion, then their disbelief, and finally, air panic. The freeze on what they thought was their inheritance account. The demand for immediate repayment of the fraudulent loan taken out in my name, accompanied by a police report for identity theft and forgery. The initial wave of lawyers' letters, each one colder and more formal than the last, outlining the charges and the consequences. They had no idea what hit them because they couldn't conceive that I, their supposedly naive daughter, would possess the foresight, the resources, or the sheer coldness to unleash such a calculated legal assault. They had always underestimated me, writing me off as the emotional, rebellious one. But years of navigating the cutthroat world of tech startups had honed me into a formidable strategist. I learned to anticipate, to plan, to execute with unwavering resolve. This was not about a tantrum or a heated argument. This was about accountability. This was about justice. And it was about sending an undeniable message. You don't try to steal from me. You don't violate my trust. And you certainly don't slap me in public and expect to get away with it. The blueprint for their unraveling was complete, and the execution had begun. Slowly, inexorably, their carefully constructed world of appearances and lies was about to come crashing down. As the legal gears began to turn, slowly but relentlessly, against my parents, my attention turned, almost reluctantly, to Emily. My golden child sister. Her perfect wedding, her perfect husband, her perfect life, it had all been meticulously curated, a facade maintained for public consumption. And a significant part of my parents' financial fraud centered around maintaining that facade, specifically for her. While Maya Lin was deep in the financial muck of my parents' dealings, I asked her to broaden her scope slightly. Not to incriminate Emily, but to understand the man she had just married, Jacob Hartford. On the surface, Jacob was everything my parents, and likely Emily herself, had sought in a son-in-law, charming, handsome, from a respectable family with a seemingly bright future. He was the picture of a stable, successful catch. But perfection, I'd learned, was often a thin veil over something far more complicated. My own life had taught me that. I didn't have specific suspicions about Jacob initially. It was more a lingering curiosity, a sense that if my parents were tangled in such deep deceit, perhaps other aspects of their carefully constructed reality were also flawed. Plus, given Emily's sheltered upbringing and tendency to idealize, I wondered if she truly knew the man she married. Maya, ever the professional, pursued the inquiry with her usual discretion and efficiency. And what she uncovered was, perhaps predictably, a stark contrast to Jacob's polished exterior. He wasn't just charming. He was a serial philanderer with a significant gambling problem. The bright future was propped up by mounting debts from online casinos and various illicit side ventures, to cover his losses and fund his lavish lifestyle, which included an ongoing affair. The mistress was a relatively minor actress with whom he'd been involved for over a year. Maya provided detailed reports, complete with dates, locations, and even photographic evidence, the kind that leaves no room for denial. The gambling addiction was more severe, with thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into online poker sites and high-stakes games. There were records of loans from questionable sources and desperate attempts to recoup losses. His respectable family was apparently either oblivious or complicit in his financial recklessness, though Maya's report hinted at their own struggles to keep his darker habits under wraps. Initially, I looked at the file, the stack of incriminating evidence, and felt a strange calm. This was not revenge against Emily. Emily was a symptom of my parents' pathology, not its cause. She was an unwitting recipient of their favoritism, and she had grown up in a bubble of delusional perfection. But Jacob was a choice my parents had championed, a choice Emily had made. And he was a part of the very illusion I was dismantling. My decision on what to do with this information was swift and deliberate. I wouldn't use it to publicly embarrass Emily or to gloat. My revenge against my parents was already set in motion through legal channels. This was different. This was about exposing a truth that Emily, shielded as she was, deserved to know. It was about allowing her to see the cracks in her own fairy tale, to understand that not everything was as pristine as her parents had led her to believe. So I compiled a concise, anonymous package, no return address. No identifying marks beyond careful handling to avoid fingerprints. It contained selected pieces of Maya's evidence, undeniable photos of Jacob with his mistress, printed out transaction logs from his most significant gambling losses, and a few carefully chosen, damning text messages and emails. I mailed it to Emily's new address, timed to arrive just as she and Jacob were embarking on their honeymoon. A little wedding present, courtesy of reality. I imagined the scene. Emily, fresh from her perfect wedding, surrounded by the idyllic setting of their honeymoon, opening an envelope filled with the sordid truth about her husband. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning horror. Her idealized perception of love, of commitment, of her perfect new life, shattered into a million pieces. I didn't feel victorious, not in the triumphant, cheering way one might expect. There was no surge of petty satisfaction. Instead, I felt seen. For years, I had been the one who saw through their charades, the one who recognized the flaws in their perfect world, only to be dismissed, ignored, or punished. Now, Emily would have to see it too. She would have to confront the reality that the perfection her parents had orchestrated, and which she had so readily embraced, was a carefully constructed lie. The fallout, as predicted, was immediate and chaotic. Not publicly, not yet, but within the confines of their private lives. Maya's contacts, always reliable, confirmed the immediate turmoil. The honeymoon was cut short. Emily, devastated and furious, confronted Jacob. There were screaming matches, accusations, denials that quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence I had provided. Jacob's charming facade cracked, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. Weeks into their marriage, a union meant to be Emily's blissful forever, it imploded. The perfect couple was embroiled in a brutal, private war. Emily was utterly distraught, her world crumbling around her. Her parents, already reeling from the quiet legal storm I had unleashed upon them, were now faced with the spectacular failure of their golden child's marriage, another layer of their curated lives exposed as hollow. I heard snippets through the grapevine, through whispers in the social circles I still indirectly touched. The story was that Emily and Jacob were having issues, that the honeymoon had been a disaster. Speculation ran rampant, but no one knew the true depth of the rot. I didn't instigate the confrontation directly. I simply provided the truth. Emily's reaction, the shattering of her idolized perception of love and family, was her own. She was experiencing, perhaps for the first time, the harsh reality that lay beneath the polished surface her parents had always maintained. And that was it. My part was done. I never reached out to Emily, never offered solace, never revealed my hand. It wasn't about hurting her, it was about exposing the truth. She had lived in their illusion for so long. Now she would have to face reality, just as I had been forced to much earlier in life. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. Her fairy tale had turned into a nightmare, not because I wished it, but because it was built on foundations of sand and lies, perpetuated by the very people who claimed to love her most. Each legal case against my parents began to unfold with the precise, methodical pace of the justice system. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, continuous pressure that built day by day. Initial notices, then formal complaints, leading eventually to court proceedings. I had ensured that the lawyers engaged were relentless and thorough. They left no stone unturned, presenting the irrefutable evidence of the misappropriated inheritance, the forged loan documents, and the overall pattern of financial recklessness and deception. What shocked my parents, I'm sure, was the sheer volume and meticulous detail of the evidence. They had acted with such a sense of entitlement and impunity for so long. They couldn't possibly have imagined I would uncover their every misdeed. The idea that their black sheep daughter had the wherewithal, the resources, and the cold determination to expose them to this extent must have been a devastating blow to their carefully crafted self-image. As the case progressed, the image of perfection my parents had clung to so desperately, the one they had built their entire lives around, began to crumble. The details of their financial malfeasance, once hidden behind closed doors and carefully curated appearances, became public record. The fraud, the deceit, the remortgaging of their home, the draining of my inheritance, the fraudulent loan taken in my name, it was all laid bare in court documents and eventually in local news reports. Their social circle, the very people whose opinions they valued above all else, started to turn on them. These were individuals who thrived on appearances, on status, on the illusion of impeccable reputations. When that illusion shattered, exposing debt, fraud, and a profound lack of integrity, distance was quickly created. Dinner invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. The whispers must have been deafening. My mother, Diane, who had always cultivated her image as a gracious socialite, must have found this social ostracization particularly excruciating. Her entire identity was tied to how she was perceived by this specific group of people. Now they saw her for what she was, a desperate, narcissistic woman willing to commit fraud to maintain a facade. The financial pressure became insurmountable. Faced with the requirement to repay the fraudulent loan and the legal costs associated with fighting both the inheritance claim and the fraud charges, they quickly filed for bankruptcy. Their assets, including the upstate home they had so proudly declared their early retirement haven, were no longer theirs. The house went into foreclosure. The Carsons, once pillars of their suburban community, were now publicly disgraced and financially ruined. It all happened precisely as I had planned, orchestrated with a level of precision that felt almost surreal. I watched from a distance, receiving updates from Maya and my legal team. I had purposefully detached myself emotionally, turning the process into a complex business operation. I had set out to take back what was mine and to ensure they faced the consequences of their actions, and that was exactly what was happening. Then the final, inevitable domino fell. Emily, her marriage to Jacob having utterly imploded after my anonymous gift of truth, had nowhere else to go. Her fairy tale life had disintegrated. Jacob was revealed to be a philandering gambler, and the lavish wedding, the start of her perfect new life, had been built on her parents' frantic, fraudulent house of cards. With Jacob out of the picture and likely facing his own legal repercussions for gambling debts and other undisclosed dealings, and no independent means of support, Emily moved back in with my parents. Only now, their grand home was no longer grand. It was in foreclosure. Their privileged life was gone. Everything was ashes. The golden child was left with nothing but the smoldering remnants of a life built on lies and stolen money, forced to live in the wreckage her parents had created. I remember getting the news, seeing the pictures of the for sale sign on their once imposing property. There was no triumphant cheer. No fist-pumping satisfaction. I watched them fall like dominoes, one after another, their elaborate construct of perfection collapsing under the weight of their own deceit. And as I watched, a profound realization settled over me. I didn't celebrate. The expected rush of vindication simply wasn't there. Instead, there was a deep, quiet sadness. I mourned. I mourned the family I never really had. The fantasy of a loving, supportive unit that, despite all evidence, I had probably held onto for too long. I mourned the loss of what should have been, the parental love and validation that I had craved but never received. They had been so focused on appearances, on their own selfish desires, that they had destroyed everything. They had chosen to use me, to betray me, rather than face their own failures. And in their downfall, I saw not just their ruins, but the ruins of any hope of reconciliation, any possibility of having the kind of family I had always dreamed of. The price of their perfection had been the complete and utter destruction of their family, and for that there was only a sense of profound loss. The house was gone, their reputation was in tatters, Emily was broken, and I was free. But a freedom that came with a heavy cost months passed after the legal proceedings concluded and my parents' world crumbled. The initial intensity, the sharp focus on revenge, began to recede, leaving a quieter, albeit profound, emptiness. I had achieved what I set out to do. I had protected myself, reclaimed what was mine, and ensured they faced accountability. But as the dust settled, the emotional residue of decades of neglect and betrayal lingered. I found myself alone in my penthouse, the silence sometimes deafening. The initial surge of adrenaline had faded, replaced by a deep sense of fatigue. It was then I realized that while I had won the battle against my family, I still needed to win the war within myself. The constant feeling of being unseen, of having to fight for every scrap of validation, of living with the knowledge of such profound betrayal, it had left scars. This realization led me to therapy. It wasn't an easy decision. My family had always dismissed anything related to mental health, seeing it as a weakness, a sign of not coping. But I knew I couldn't move forward, truly, without addressing the deep-seated impact of my upbringing. I found Elena Rodriguez, a therapist who specialized in complex family dynamics. Our sessions began with me recounting the events, the slap, the fraud, the unraveling. But quickly, we delved deeper, peeling back the layers of my childhood, the subtle slights, the overt favoritism shown to Emily, the constant feeling of needing to prove my worth. Elena was a patient and insightful guide, helping me to articulate emotions I didn't even know I possessed. She helped me understand that my drive, my fierce independence, and even my success were, in part, a response to a deep-seated need for validation from parents who were incapable of providing it. Through therapy, I began healing. It wasn't a sudden, miraculous transformation, but a gradual process of understanding, processing, and ultimately accepting. I learned to differentiate between my parents' narrative of me and my true self. I began to validate my own experiences, my own feelings, rather than constantly seeking external approval. I realized that the fight for their acceptance had consumed so much of my energy that could now be redirected towards building a life truly for myself, on my own terms, free from the shadow of their expectations or disappointments. A significant part of my healing journey involved externalizing my story. I started writing. Initially, it was just journaling, a private outlet for the raw emotions that surfaced during therapy. But as I wrote, the narrative began to take shape. It wasn't just a tale of betrayal and revenge. It was a story of resilience, of overcoming adversity, of finding strength in unexpected places. This eventually evolved into the foundation for a memoir. It was cathartic, transforming my pain into something tangible, something that could potentially help others. That memoir, still a work in progress, then inspired another project, a podcast. I called it Unseen and Unbowed. Each episode delves into different aspects of my journey, themes of self-worth, toxic family dynamics, financial independence, and reclaiming one's narrative after experiencing profound betrayal. It was scary at first, putting myself out there, sharing such personal details with the world. But the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from listeners who resonated with my story, who had experienced similar forms of emotional and financial abuse from their own families. The podcast and the incredible community that grew around it led to another surprising development. I started hosting retreats for women who had overcome toxic families. These aren't just therapy sessions. They're immersive experiences designed to foster healing, empower self-discovery, and build supportive communities. We focus on practical strategies for setting boundaries, rebuilding self-esteem, and forging a path forward independent of familial approval or disapproval. It's been incredibly rewarding to connect with these women, to share my experiences, and to witness their own journeys of reclamation and healing. My revenge against my parents was very much about justice and accountability. But building my own peace was about something far deeper. It was about internal liberation. It was about realizing that I didn't just get revenge. I reclaimed the narrative of my life. I was no longer the black sheep, defined by their disapproval. I.W.S. Vanessa Carson, a successful entrepreneur, a storyteller, a healer, a woman who had navigated profound betrayal and emerged stronger, clearer, and more grounded in her own truth. The penthouse, once a symbol of defiance, now feels like a sanctuary. It's a testament to my hard work, yes, but also a space where I can truly be myself, free from judgment, free from expectation. It's here that I write, record my podcast, and find the quiet moments necessary for continued growth. I learned that true peace isn't about the absence of conflict, but the presence of self-acceptance and a clearer understanding of one's own worth, independent of anyone else's opinion. This piece, unlike their facade, was built from within. Brick by Authentic Brick. Life has a strange way of bringing things full circle, even when you think all the circles have been closed. Months after the storm of their financial and social downfall, long after I had begun to build my own peace and reclaim my narrative, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something, perhaps a faint flicker of an old curiosity, made me swipe to connect. It was her. My mother, Diane. Her voice, usually so composed, so theatrically perfect, was broken. It was thin, reedy, laced with tears and a fragility I had never heard from her before. Vanessa? She choked out, her voice barely a whisper. Is that you? I didn't respond immediately. I just listened, the sound of her crying echoing strangely in the quiet of my penthouse. It was a sound I had rarely, if ever, heard in my life. My mother was not one for overt displays of emotion, especially not vulnerability. "We didn't mean to lose you," she sobbed. We didn't mean for any of this to happen." My mind flashed back to the wedding, to the sting on my cheek, to the cold, hard entitlement in her eyes as she demanded my home. It flashed back to Maya's reports, the forged documents, the stolen inheritance. "We didn't mean to lose you," the words felt hollow, devoid of genuine remorse, as if her sorrow was for the consequences she faced. Not for the hurt she had inflicted. It sounded like regret over losing an asset. Rather than sorrow for damaging a relationship, I just listened. There was a part of me, a small, long-buried part, that wanted to unleash every single hurt, every betrayal, every instance of being dismissed and invalidated. A part of me wanted to articulate the sheer depth of their cruelty. But as I heard her faltering voice, the tears, the attempts at what sounded like an apology, I realized something profoundly important. The Vanessa she was talking to, the one she had lost, didn't exist anymore. That person, the girl who craved their approval, who was hurt by their neglect, had died on the dance floor of Emily's wedding. The new Vanessa was forged in the fire of betrayal and built on the bedrock of self-reliance, and that new Vanessa didn't need their apology. She didn't need their understanding. He didn't need their validation or their forgiveness. She didn't need reconciliation to be whole. "Hello?" she whispered again, her voice pleading. "Vanessa, please say something." I took a deep breath, and I hung up. It wasn't easy. There was a pang, a residual ache of what might have been. But it was a necessary act of self-preservation. What kind of closure could she offer me? A distorted version of events? A superficial apology designed to alleviate her own guilt, not mine? True closure, I've learned, doesn't always come from a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reconciliation. Sometimes, the most powerful closure comes from walking away. From recognizing that some wounds cannot, and perhaps should not, be healed in the traditional sense. Some relationships are too toxic to be re-entered. They taught me how to be strong. They taught me how to be resourceful, how to be resilient, how to fight for myself. They taught me how to protect myself from them. And in doing so, they inadvertently gave me the tools to build a life far richer, far more authentic, and infinitely more peaceful than anything they could have ever offered. Their betrayal ultimately became my liberation. So here I am, in my truth, in my hard-earned peace. Their final attempt at contact, that tearful, desperate call, only solidified what I already knew. My future did not include them. The door was closed, not out of lingering anger, but out of a profound, self-preserving peace. And that, in itself, was the ultimate, quiet victory.